Hi, folks. Welcome to another daily devotion. And we're thinking this morning again about this working out of our salvation with fear and trembling. There's an interesting phrase that Paul uses as he introduces this whole idea of working out in our daily lives what God has worked in. And that phrase is found in verse 12. He says to them that they are to do this not just in his presence, but now much more in his absence. Now, the fact of the matter was that Paul, of course, was involved in founding the church in Philippi, and he had been among these brethren, these believers. And while he was with them, he taught them, and no doubt he was a great encouragement to them and a great inspiration. But Paul is no longer there. He's actually in prison when he writes this letter. And Paul's concern for these believers, as indeed it was no doubt for other believers, was that they would give themselves diligently to the work of the kingdom. They would give themselves diligently to witnessing and to living out the Christian lives, while the likes of Paul and maybe Peter or Barnabas or whoever was among them. But when these mentors were taken away, that they would allow things to slip. And basically, what Paul is doing here in this phrase is he's encouraging them to work out their salvation with a proper motive behind the living of the Christian life. They're to do it not just to please Paul or Peter or whoever. They are to do it in order to please God. One commentator puts it like this: the Philippians, in working out their salvation, should not be swayed by the force of Paul's personality or by his appearing among them in person. The congregation at Philippi must live a truly Christian life independent of his presence or absence. And brethren, that's a very important point. If your motive for living the Christian life is merely to please some other human being, be that your husband, your wife, be it your mother, your father, or be it your minister, your pastor, then you're not honouring God by the way you live. You're seeking the praise of men. Warren Wiersbe, whose commentary on Philippians is helpful in places, he says Paul was warning the Philippians that not his presence with them, but their desire to obey God and please him was the important thing. They could not build their lives on Paul. And here's a very important point Wiersbe makes: because Paul might not be with them very long. It is sad to see how some ministries in the church weaken or fall apart because of a change in leadership. We have a tendency to please men and to obey God only when others are watching. I wonder if that's true of you. I wonder, am I guilty of putting on a show of godliness when we're in the company of other Christians? But whenever we're out of their company, whenever they leave, or when maybe we move away from that particular circle of people, our lives then become somewhat different, not as disciplined in working out our Christian faith. I have known people under my own ministry in congregations who seem to have been making really good progress in their spiritual lives. And in the providence of God, I have been called to a different congregation and moved away, and learn maybe 2 years later that individual has become very undisciplined in their attendance at worship on the Sunday, at the midweek Bible study. There's no longer any obvious godliness about them. And maybe it was because that they were living the way they were living in the past simply to please their pastor. Friends, we are to work out our salvation not as in my presence only, says Paul, but much more in my absence. We are to prove our faith is truly a God-given faith, the product of a genuine work of God's grace and of God's power in our life, and that it's not a man-produced and man-pleasing faith that is dependable upon and seeks only the pleasing and approval of another human being. So Paul says, do this not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence. May God help us not to live our lives to be men pleasers, but rather to be God pleasers. Have a great day.